China, money, money, you, China, 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 come here. This is the local vendor greeting me as I'm walking past the market in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The story I'm going to tell you is about my field research in hectic, chaotic Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, where I spent 5 months looking at Chinese interactions, businesses, and cultural activities on the ground.
Between those two countries, China and Ethiopia, includes major construction projects.
The Chinese Chamber of Commerce has awarded more than 130 scholarships to Ethiopian students.
My daily routine, it was going from this local Ethiopian neighborhood in Bole, a developed part of Addis near the airport. After a few days of living in Addis and passing by some fruit vendors, I heard, China, money, money, China, China, come here. I'm not China, I say in dismay. They're looking at me surprised. I realized at that moment that everybody who's foreign is called China, and this became a daily occurrence in my life in Addis. This somewhat innocent and perhaps a silly greeting actually has a really interesting story to tell us about Chinese presence in Ethiopia and more broadly in African continent. It showcases both the immense depth of Chinese presence on the economic and financial frontier, but also some degree of superficiality when it comes to Chinese engagements on the ground. So first, when it comes to the economic immersion, local residents, a foreigner, a visitor will tell you that they see China on the ground, they feel it, and they cannot avoid it. As you exit Addis Ababa airport, you'll see signs in Chinese. You exit and walk further, you may be lucky if you run into crowds of Chinese engineers and construction workers training local workers in their, on duty on the local construction site. You keep walking further, on the left side you'll see a new shiny hotel, this immense white building that looks like it's straight out of Shenzhen. If you step aside of Bole Road, you'll see a little Chinatown, a Chinese neighborhood full of Chinese restaurants. You can use WeChat to pay for your meals. At the same time, what we see is some superficiality or some disconnect when it comes to Chinese engagements in Ethiopia. There's very little cultural contact, and essentially Chinese communities live very much in isolation of their local hosts. They travel in groups, 2 or 3 groups, going together, buying groceries, heading back to their compounds. And I think that disconnect creates difficulties for local communities to understand China, to access China, and to accept it as more than just money or just a transaction that they represent. So as I mentioned earlier, I spent all this time in Ethiopia looking at Chinese presence. I'm more interested in the softer side of this influence, in the latter aspect of cultural interaction, political engagements, and so-called soft power.
Chinese!
But what I'm exploring in my work are 3 things. The first thing is the elites. These are, Ethiopian officials who are basically trained in China. Taking them to China from Ethiopia, exposing them to the Chinese experience, and sending them back to hopefully become more of a fan of China. The second thing is the youth. So university students, I'm looking at Confucius Institutes, but also scholarships that are provided by China. And the third level are sort of spectacles of China in Ethiopia. So this includes construction sites, all kinds of cultural ceremonies, events. For example, trade fairs I've been attending numerous times to see how China presents itself there, but also the media. How does Chinese media influence local voices? How do they try to influence it through their own media outlets in Ethiopia, but also by inviting, teaching, training Ethiopian journalists in China? Definitely Ethiopian. I'm a fan until the end. I couldn't quite handle baijiu, but I do like some very nicely distilled vodka. I guess my Russian soul will speak out at this moment again. It's the war and peace for me.
我有另外的任务，你干嘛去了？遵照伟大领袖毛主席的教导，到国外修铁路去了。哦，你到那个坦桑尼亚、赞比亚去了。